Hi, I'm Joy, and today I would like to talk to you about Scorpio Moon. So, I actually have this moon myself, and it's something that is a very painful thing. And if you have a Scorpio moon, you know this. So, I'd like to talk about some of the things that I've learned about how to work with a Scorpio moon, some of the lower expressions, and some of the higher expressions. So, what is the moon, just in general, in our astrology charts? The moon is our inner world. It's the way we reflect on things. And it essentially represents the way we were nurtured when we were a baby. So, and a small child, just are nurturing, but it starts to form as soon as we're born, if not sooner. Um, and essentially, what it means is that our emotional needs were not met, that we were very sensitive, but we did not feel safe expressing our emotions. We had to keep them to ourselves for some reason. And we learned that it's not safe to be open with people about what's happening in our inner world, that our emotional needs will not be met, and that life is painful. So, having a Scorpio moon is kind of inherently traumatic. Like, if you have a Scorpio moon, you've got attachment trauma. So, how do we deal with this? Um, well, before we get into that, let's talk about how this can manifest in our lives as we get older. Scorpio moons can be extremely secretive about their inner worlds. And like in my case, my ascendant is Aquarius, so I look like I'm a very emotionally detached person a lot of times. And meanwhile, I've got this like intense Scorpio moon action going on inside, and you would not be able to tell by looking at me that my inner world is that intense. And I've become a lot more emotionally open as I've gotten older and done a lot of healing. However, there have been a lot of times when I was accused of not caring about something that I cared about a lot because, people couldn't tell just by looking at me. So, Scorpio moons are secretive about how they're feeling, about their inner worlds, about their perspective on things, about, well, kind of just everything, just in general. And Scorpio in general is a very private and secretive placement, but um, with Scorpio moons, it's like, especially with their own inner world. And it's a very dark place. There's a lot of intensity and a lot of like different parts of us can be very extreme. Like I started doing parts work where I like interact with different parts of myself that, are mostly unconscious to get to know myself better and to meet any unconscious needs that I might have and, heal anything that needs to be healed. There's something called IFS. It stands for Internal Family Systems. That is just wonderful for this. It's just an amazing tool. Um, and you can look that up on YouTube. There's a 4-part training series that's actually just really great for learning how to do it for yourself. And if you're a Scorpio moon, you are in a much better position than any other moon sign to be your own therapist. So that is why I'm putting this just like right in the video right now. You can find that 4-part training series on YouTube, and there are also a lot of books out there. some really good books about IFS. So if you want to look into it, just go with whatever one resonates with you. But what I was saying is that I've found that different parts of myself are very extreme, very polarized. And by polarized, I mean there's like a lot of inner conflict. They're very dramatic, and there's a lot of pain that they were carrying around, and sometimes I still find parts that are carrying around a lot of pain. But IFS is a wonderful tool for unburdening all that and releasing it. What else is a Scorpio moon? Very sensitive, particularly to any potential evidence of rejection. And Scorpio is fixed water. So this is stable feelings, essentially. So basically it's about like deep emotional attachment. But with that, there's this tendency to like deep emotional attachments are kind of just inherently painful. Um, there's this fear of loss or fear of rejection. And under all of Scorpio's nonsense, at the heart of it, it's basically a fear of unrequited love or losing a loved one, but mostly a fear of unrequited love. Like that's kind of the heart of it. And a lot of times, if not always, that goes back to feeling unloved as a baby or very small child and like not having your emotional needs met. So there's this sensitivity to rejection, and it is not obvious a lot of times with Scorpio moons because we don't show it. Something, some look, something that a person said, something they didn't say can trigger this feeling of rejection. And instead of talking about it, what's most natural for us is to hide it and withdraw. And when we're experiencing very intense feelings, when we're just like overwhelmed by these like waves of pain running through our bodies, we just isolate. That's the natural thing for a Scorpio moon to do. So we're very hurt, and then we isolate, and then if it's somebody that's important to us, and obviously it is, or we wouldn't have such strong feelings, but how do you deal with it if you're not going to work it out with that person? Well, you kind of emotionally withdraw a little bit. You make it so that person doesn't quite have the same access to you anymore. It's all about avoiding vulnerability without having to have this open conversation. Like, I'm hurting right now. This is what happened. This is how I perceived it, which is very, 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 very hard for a Scorpio moon. And what ends up happening is relationships become gradually more distant over time if you're approaching it like this, and then you're just not all that attached anymore, and then you move on. So by not talking to people about when we're feeling this way and why, and talking it out together, we are very much sabotaging our relationships. That's one of the ways that we do it. Another way is by mistaking longing for love and feeling like, and this is very, very much a trauma response, by the way, but if we need intensity in our feelings, and even just like in the situation or the dynamic, in order to be certain of how we feel about somebody, then we're going to draw all sorts of pain to ourselves and drama in our relationships. We're going to create it, or we're going to be drawn to people who will provide it for us. And, you know, it's just a way that our imprinting as a child and like our expectations about how it is to be attached to someone is going to be painful. It's just how that pattern continues to play itself out throughout our lives. So we can mistake longing for love and get very, very, very intense feelings for people who are not interested in us, or who maybe are a little bit interested in us, but the relationship isn't there yet. So, so we end up we end up not where things actually are. We're like off somewhere else in this like intense feeling of like love or attachment to this person, and hurting because they're not there too. Well, like it's only been a month, come on, you know, or whatever the case may be. Um, so it is unconsciously a way to avoid being too close to somebody, because when we are, you know, off over here feeling upset that they're not there too, or thinking that they are there and not realizing that they're still back over here, instead of just being where things really are between the two of you, um, you know, and listening to what they say about where they are, and just being open and receptive to what they're communicating, instead of like thinking that you understand them better than they understand themselves, which is another Scorpio moon characteristic, psychoanalyzing and thinking that we know people better than they know themselves. When we do that, we're sabotaging the relationship, and we are, you know, pushing people away because we're not truly available to them. If we're here and they're here, we're not really available to them. So that's another way that we sabotage our relationships. And then another way is being interested in someone who's just really not all that interested in us, or not available, because we expect to feel that feeling of longing instead of like actually like having a calm, stable, healthy, wholesome relationship that's completely reciprocal and mutual and just nice and lovely. And that these are all trauma responses, by the way. So, what else does a Scorpio moon do? Well, like I mentioned before, there's a lot of psychoanalysis, and it's not just partners, potential partners, um, you know, and people that are important to us. It's everybody around us all the time. And like, not even just that, like if we're watching a movie, you know, we can kind of analyze how it's written, or you know, we can kind of see through advertising to some extent, or a large extent. So the psychoanalysis becomes a very prominent feature of having a Scorpio moon. There's a lot of analyzing people. And the thing is, we are often right, but we're not always right. And we can't know for sure when we are and when we're not. So it's really important, even if you're seeing something, um, you know, you think you see something and you talk to a person about it, or they tell you something else, just because it doesn't match doesn't mean that they're lying. Like people don't always, know entirely how they feel about it. You know, one part of them feels this, another feels this, another feels this, and like whatever they're expressing in that moment, unless they're just straight up lying, which we're pretty good at knowing when people are intentionally lying. But you know, if somebody's telling you something and they're not lying, then I mean, you can go ahead and do your psychoanalysis and be like, okay, well, this is the actual situation, or this is why this person is saying this, or whatever. And that's fine. But just know that whatever they're saying to them in that moment is what they're experiencing, and meet them where they are. You know, like it doesn't always need to be complicated. You know, you can just be present with them. And that goes a really long ways in relationships, being present in the moment with people. And you know, Scorpio moons and Scorpio placements in general tend to expect this like great deal of continuity a lot of times because it's a fixed sign, even though our own emotions can be all over the place. Even though that happens, a lot of times we expect complete continuity from other people and have trust issues when we don't see it. And people are just not like that. So we just tend to have trust issues and um, not feel safe with people. But so, I mean, that's kind of what it comes down to in the end. Like, we don't feel safe with people. We don't feel safe being vulnerable. We don't feel safe expressing our inner world. A lot of times we believe that, like, the darkness that's there isn't okay, or other people won't accept it. So there's a tendency to just keep that to ourselves and not let other people know. What else for Scorpio moon? Another thing is that we are very energy sensitive. So intuition is a feeling, just like emotions, just like sensations. And just like emotions and sensations, just because we're feeling it does not mean that it's an accurate representation of reality. It means that there's something happening, some part of us, or something um, is causing that feeling to happen, and it's worth exploring. But just because you're like, you know, you believe something intuitively, or you sense something intuitively, does not mean that that is 100% the truth. Now, am I telling you not to trust your intuition? No, absolutely not. And what I was saying earlier about like believing people, there too, you know, am I telling you to just believe whatever people tell you? No, 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 definitely not. Um, what I'm saying is that, you know, there are limitations to our superpowers, essentially. So I think it's really important to tune in very, very, very deep down and see what feels right at your core and trust your inner compass. And a lot of intuition actually happens on a more surface level than that. And that psychoanalysis is most certainly happening on a much more surface level. So, you know, those things are cool and they can be valuable, and I'm not telling you to disregard them. But above all else, trust what you know at your very core. Go with that. It doesn't matter if you understand the situation. Trust that inner compass. What else? Scorpio moons are very much about depth. They want to get to know other people's depths. And if somebody doesn't have a lot of depth, it can be a little bit disconcerting. There was one person that I was in a relationship with at one point, and I kept waiting to like see the deeper stuff. Like, I assumed that there must be some depth there that I wasn't seeing yet. And then a lot of time went by, and I realized, like, wow, this person is like exactly who he says he is. There like really just is not that much depth there. Like, there are no hidden depths here. Like, this is a very like what you see is what you get person. And that's cool too. Like, I'm not criticizing that, but for Scorpio moon, it feels like how can I possibly be intimate with somebody who doesn't have a lot of depth, basically. And intimacy is very, very important to Scorpio moons. And with Scorpio moons, we will judge the depth of our connection with somebody by how open we feel safe being with them. So the more we can express our inner world to a person, the more we trust them, the closer we feel to them. And we can like somebody a lot and spend a fair amount of time with them to some extent, at least for a while, without actually feeling that close with them, without actually feeling that intimate. Like, if we're not sharing secrets with each other, how close are we really? So that's another Scorpio theme, particularly with Scorpio moons. And, with the Scorpio moon, like, the moon is our sense of, like, it's like our emotional security needs. So if people aren't showing us a little bit of darkness about them, something that they don't show other people, and vice versa, um, we're just really not sure how safe we are with that person. So it's kind of a big deal for Scorpio moon. But on the other hand, Scorpio moons are very good at holding space for that darkness. So it's like the moon is how we need to be nurtured and how we nurture others, and accepting the pain and the darkness in ourselves is how we nurture ourselves. How accepting the pain and the darkness in others is how we nurture others, holding space for processing and holding space for transformation. So Scorpio moons are very good people to have around when things are looking pretty dark or when you're experiencing darkness, because there's nothing that you can say to them that, especially if they have done even a somewhat decent amount of depth work themselves, and they tend to do that. Um, like, there's nothing you can say to them where they're going to be like, wow, that's too dark, unless they're immature. Like, there can be, and kind of depending on other, like, if Saturn is conjunct the moon, then there's going to be a lot of like holding back in that regard. But anyways, so when it comes to Scorpio moons, um, holding space for darkness, like, for the most part, there's like nothing you can say to them that is going to be just like way too disturbing. Like, they aren't necessarily going to trust you. Like, if you tell them that, you know what, I don't even want to say examples, but they aren't necessarily going to trust you, but they can hold space for it though. Like, there's a difference between holding space and forming a personal attachment to somebody. So with Scorpio moons, like, they do need to go together, but just because they're holding space doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be attachment. They need to also like what they find there. And if there needs to not like be anything that's just like too much the wrong thing for them. So anyways, the and people with Scorpio moons can hold space for others to grieve, hold space for others to undergo transformations in their life. So let's look at what transformations are. Why would anybody go through a figurative death and rebirth. Well, what happens is we get these ideas in our head that this is how things should be. We get attached to things. And then when they don't turn out the way that we want them to, or when we lose that thing, it can be extremely painful, extremely painful. And when that happens, sometimes it feels like we're gonna die. And we have to let that part of us go. And well, it's not so much letting the part of us go, but that idea go. So it like hurts so much, we have no choice but to give it up. Like whatever the idea was, whatever the attachment was, whatever our concept of ourselves was, like whatever it is that like hurts so much, there comes this point where it's just too painful and we can't hang on to it anymore and we have to let it go. And that's a figurative death, and then there's a rebirth that follows that. And I have a theory about how, like, even though Scorpio is the sign of transformation, the transformation doesn't actually happen in Scorpio. What happens is um, we feel that pain in Scorpio. And then, in order to actually experience that rebirth, we have to like move along the trine to Pisces, where there's release. Like until we let it go, we just stay there in anguish. So we have to actually release it and let it go. And once we do, then there's a rebirth. And it's Pisces is the figurative death, the letting go, the surrender. And then Aries is the next sign in the progression around the zodiac. And then Aries is actually where the rebirth occurs. Aries is about new beginnings. And this works for houses too, like eighth house, 12th house, first house. But, anyways, so that's just my own personal theory about how it works. In order to get to that point, though, you have to go into that Scorpio heaviness and darkness. Like if you're not doing that, like why would you ever like give up something that feels like it's who you are, if you aren't experiencing immense pain? So basically, Scorpio like is very much about the transformation, but it's not working by itself. Like it um, facilitates the transformation. But anyways, so moving along. So what else about Scorpio Moon? Because we have this tendency to transform ourselves, we can change a lot in our lifetimes and we can grow a lot in our lifetimes. We have a capacity for deep, deep, deep healing. And once we do that healing, we're in a position to nurture others through similar types of healing. The one thing that I would say about, say, 2 Scorpio moons about this ability to nurture others through transformation is to just hold space and don't try to tamper. Don't try to push it along. Don't try to help them realize what they need to transform into or anything like that. There's a nice analogy about butterflies. So if you see a cocoon or chrysalis and you cut it open halfway through the transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly, you're not going to see a caterpillar that's like shrinking and growing wings. What you're going to see is just a bunch of goo inside of it. And that's the way transformations are. So be gentle with yourself and be gentle with others, and don't try to impose yourself onto that transformation in any way. What happens in that goo state, it's kind of magical, it's amazing, but you can't rush it, and you can't look at that goo and like judge it for being goo, just give it time, it'll happen. It That's a really important thing. Just like hold space for the transformation and give it time. It'll happen by itself. It doesn't need to be helped along. And in fact, once a caterpillar has transformed into a butterfly inside the chrysalis, if you try to help it out of the cocoon of the chrysalis, it'll never fly and it'll die. So again, hold space and let it happen in its own time. Don't try to force it and don't try to control it. Just let it naturally occur. Another thing about having a Scorpio moon is that this tendency towards transformation, intensity, depth, darkness really, 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 really needs to be balanced out with some Taurus focus. So, um, take care of your body, make opportunities to enjoy simple pleasures in life, and be as immersed in the pleasure as you possibly can. So, I'm talking about things like eating a nutritious and delicious meal, or burning some candles, or curling up in a soft blanket and watching your favorite old movie, or going for a walk in nature. It's really important just in general to balance any placement out, especially important placements, with something opposite of it, because the higher expression of anything is always, not even just in the zodiac, just anything, is always going to incorporate some of its opposite. If it's too much of one thing, now we've got something that's too extreme, and now we have the lower expression. So it's really important to balance out with some Taurus, some stability. Don't focus too much on the depth and the darkness. There are some negative consequences to it. Number one, emotional pain and feelings of rejection. Well, first of all, feelings of rejection are registered by our brains as physical pain. Number two, um, well, this is part of the same thing, but emotional pain is also registered that way. And what happens is we get endorphin releases from experiencing emotional pain. And what can happen is our system gets used to having those endorphin releases, and we end up creating more emotional pain for ourselves because we need that endorphin rush, or like because we're withdrawing from the endorphins, I should say, not an endorphin rush. At a certain point in my life, I went from being in a very painful relationship to not being in it anymore. And I kept like eating foods that were so spicy that I would get chemical burns in my mouth. And I would like accidentally burn myself when I was cooking, or like bump into something and like hurt my leg. And I knew enough about how the unconscious mind works at that point to know that it wasn't actually accidents. There was some part of me that was causing me to do that. And I said, what's going on here? why do I keep hurting myself? What's the deal with this? And the answer was because I was withdrawing from having these constant endorphin experiences because I was constantly in pain from this relationship. And then once it wasn't there anymore and my life was a lot more calm and a lot less dramatic and intense, I was going through withdrawals from it, and I was getting some physical like aches and pains because of the endorphin withdrawals, and I was unconsciously injuring myself as a result. So it's important to create a lot of pleasant sensations and calming experiences in our lives to balance out this intensity and the pain of having a Scorpio moon. Because if we don't, then we can get too focused on it, experience too much pain, go too deep into it, and get addicted to the pain, essentially. Another thing is when we're doing a lot of depth work. So even if we're like taking care of ourselves and we're, doing a lot of inner healing work, if we do too much of it too quickly, it destabilizes our nervous system and lowers our immune system. We're like literally like rewiring our neurology when we do depth work. Those the shadow work, the inner healing experiences. We're changing our nervous system when we do that. And too much too quickly can be really destabilizing. So it's important to remember slow is fast when you're doing that kind of healing, and also balance it out with some focus on Taurus. And just really focus on the things that you like, sensations that you like, that feel good. Another thing that it's important to know about a Scorpio moon is that because the moon represents our emotional needs, and Scorpio is a very intimate, emotionally intimate, and sexual, physically intimate sign. When it comes to people with Scorpio moons, there's an emotional security need for intimacy, both emotional and physical. And even though we sabotage ourselves so that we don't get that all the time, it is a need that we have in order to feel safe and comfortable in life. And, it's really, really worth the time and attention and effort and energy that it takes to heal those attachment wounds and to put yourself in a position where you can have a truly vulnerable, close, intimate relationship and really express your inner world to other people, because you're never going to feel safe and comfortable in life unless you do. And it's also really important to have that kind of relationship with yourself, to accept your own darkness and to hold space for yourself as well, and to have an attachment to yourself, like your true self, your core self. Um, when I do that parts work, when I talk to different parts of me, what most of them need to hear at the end of whatever conversation we have, the thing that it comes down to is that I love them and accept them no matter what, always. There's nothing that they can do to lose that love or to change that, and I'm not going to punish or abandon or neglect them. And this is something that we need, like we kind of need to reparent these hurting parts of ourselves, to nurture ourselves. We really need to nurture ourselves. So when we do that, we can feel safe with ourselves. And when we feel safe with ourselves, then we are in a position to be safe with other people. If we don't feel safe with ourselves, then we're not safe no matter where we go or who we're with or what we do. If we do feel safe with ourselves, then we're kind of safe wherever. And we can form very deep attachments to people because, like, if it doesn't work out or if the person dies or something like that, we're not completely and utterly devastated. Like, yes, it hurts. Yes, we have a broken heart. Yes, it takes time to move on. Yes, it's painful. Yes, it's difficult. However, we still have ourselves and we're still inherently deep down okay and whole. So, it's not like, a light switch. It's either on or off. It's not like we're just completely a mess in this regard or we're just perfect. There's increments of healing. But the more we can focus on this, or not focus on it, the more we can heal this and the more we can feel safe with ourselves and whole in ourselves, the more we can experience true intimacy and healthy attachments to other people. So it's really important for Scorpio Moon, do your inner healing work. Because we need that. We need to have those close attachments and intimacy. And Scorpio moons have a high sex drive, and sex is an emotional security need for a Scorpio moon. If they go too long without sex, then they can get pretty. It really does impact their mood because their moon is involved. Now, I have met Scorpio moons who say, I don't want to have anything to do with sex. And when that's the case, it's a trauma thing. I mean, um, I'm not going to try to say there's no such thing as an asexual Scorpio moon. I don't know. I have a hard time seeing it, but um, I don't know for sure. But generally speaking, Scorpio moons have a high sex drive and do, like, in order to, like, feel emotionally well, do need to have sex pretty regularly. Um, I shouldn't say emotionally well. Like, it's possible to have such strong access to core self that no matter how good or bad our moods are, we have that, like, inner peace and clarity and um, like an inner sanctuary for ourselves. However, our moods will be negatively impacted, um, generally speaking, if we're not having sex often enough. And not just sex, like, it needs to be like actual intimacy. And there's an energetic merging component to it as well. So I think the only other, like, bit of advice that I have for Scorpio moons is that it's important to find people that you can trust to express yourself to. And when you have people like that in your life, when you're in a bad place, when you're feeling that darkness and that pain and that intensity, say, just tell them, like, I'm in a bad place. Like, can you, are you in a position to hold space for this right now? Like, don't just assume that people in your life are, like, always in a position to hold space just because they are some of the time. I think it's a good idea to ask them, like, is now a good time for you to listen to this? And then go ahead and express it. And you can say, part of me is feeling this. When this happened, part of me perceived it as meaning this. Um, and not just, like, say how you're feeling. If you really, really trust the person, if you can actually show them some emotional expression. I know when it gets really intense, it can cause freeze where like your words just don't work properly and you can't really move or like say or do much. Um, but when I'm in that place, I like even when it's really intense, I can at least say to, you know, if there's somebody there with me, I'm frozen. It's really heavy and I can't explain it. I can at least say that much. And a loving person in my life can usually hold space for that. So just having that acceptance and that intimacy with somebody to be able to be that vulnerable with them is a really important and healing thing for a Scorpio moon. So when something happens and you feel like you should withdraw, I'd encourage you to try to talk to the person about it if you can. And what I have found is that when I do that, a lot of times, almost every time, you know, as long as I'm not like coming from a place of like reactiveness or like putting them on the defensive, like attacking them when I express myself, what ends up happening is they're pretty cool about it and we talk things through and we sort out a misunderstanding or you know they understand how important a certain thing is to me. And when we do this, we give others an opportunity to respond to us in a way that builds more trust and creates deeper intimacy between us. And it's a really important thing to do this, even though it feels really unnatural and it's really hard. Now, it's important to choose your people wisely when you do this, because if you do this with the wrong person, they're just going to react. They're not going to be able to hold space. They're going to use it against you. So don't just say, okay, I should be doing this and I'm going to do it now. Like, you know, pick your people wisely, but but do express it though. Do like find someone who can listen to it. And you know, if nothing else, like just let the person know like I'm in a bad place, like I just really need a hug, you know, in a relationship, you know, I just need you to hold me right now. That sort of thing can really help. Um, when we feel that way, it means that our nervous systems are dysregulated and physical contact with another human being, like affectionate contact, really helps to regulate the nervous system. So that can be a very important component for a healthy relationship for someone who has a, well, for anybody really, like humans need touch, it's a thing. But particularly for people with Scorpio moons, because we do have this like painful inner world. It does get better though. And you know, it's not always, even when it's bad, it's not like always super painful. It just, you know, it goes there. Well, I think that's about it. I'm trying to think, was there anything else about Scorpio moons that I wanted to say? I don't believe so. Well, thank you for watching, and please leave comments. I would love to hear your experiences and your thoughts about, you know, whatever I might have said that caught your attention in this video. Thank you very much. Bye.